Welcome to Affinity Designer. In this video I'll be talking about symbols, a feature introduced in version 1.5. Symbols are linked objects where a change in one instance will be reflected across all instances. They are deceptively simple to use but extremely powerful, and over the next few minutes I'll give you an overview of how you can create and work with this amazing feature. So let's start by using the design you can see on screen, which is made up of an artboard, which contains an artistic text object, a curve, and a group named logo, which contains several shapes and another curve. Symbols are created via the aptly named Symbols panel. This is hidden when you first open Designer, so to activate it, go to the View menu, then the Studio submenu and select Symbols. The Symbols panel is empty as we have no symbols in the current document. This is the first thing to note. The Symbols panel will only show symbols associated with the currently displayed document. The panel has three buttons: Create, Detach and Sync. Let's look at each in turn, starting with the Create button. The Create button will create a separate symbol from every selected object, group or layer. So, using the Move tool, if we select everything by dragging over the artboard and then click Create on the Symbols panel, you'll see we have created three symbols, one from the artistic text object, one from the curve and one from the logo group. As I mentioned, Designer will create a separate symbol from any selected object, group or layer. The artistic text and curve were two separate objects, so they were converted into two separate symbols. We actually wanted the text and curve to be a single symbol, so we're going to delete these two symbols. On the symbols thumbnail in the Symbols panel, control-click on a Mac or right-click on Windows and select Delete Symbol. This removes the symbols from the panel and reverts the artboard's objects back to standard objects. However, a quirk of Designer is that they display wrapped as individually grouped objects. Now we want a single symbol from these two objects. To achieve this, we must put them in the same group first. So select the first group and on the context toolbar, click Ungroup. Then drag the artistic text object inside the remaining group. Now, with the group selected, clicking Create will create a single symbol in the panel. This symbol is called Logo because the original group was called Logo, whereas this is given a generic name, Symbol, because the original group was unnamed. You can rename a symbol at any time by control-clicking on the Mac or right-clicking on Windows and selecting Rename Symbol. Type a name and click OK. Let's turn our attention to the Layers panel. Notice how the items in the panel are now listed as Symbol rather than Group, and both have a coloured gradient along their left edge. This indicates that they are the symbol's container. If you click these arrows, the symbol's contents are revealed, and these are indicated by the solid colour along the item's left edge. This distinction between a symbol's container and its contents is subtle but important, particularly when you come to resize, position and transform your symbol. Now you might have spotted that this artboard has been called Desktop Home. This is because, to show you how to use symbols in a real design project, we're going to create a home page for a fictional client. I've introduced a header, hero and footer to the design, but otherwise nothing has changed in this document. We want the header to contain the logo and nameplate in the top left, so we can simply drag the thumbnail of the symbols from the Symbols panel onto the artboard. These are too big for the header, so we need to resize them. If we select the contents of the symbols and resize them, I'm holding down the Shift key to keep the aspect ratio constrained, the other symbols are also affected. This isn't what we want, so I'm going to undo the last step by selecting Undo from the Edit menu. Remember, you can use the shortcut listed here instead, which will differ depending on your operating system. If instead we select the containers of the symbols, we can resize them and the other symbols remain unaffected. So remember, transforming a symbol's container will not affect other instances, but transforming a symbol's contents will. Now, if we try and put the symbols on the header, they'll disappear as there is no contrast in their colours. Instead, we need to update the colour of the symbols. We can do this by selecting the contents of the symbol and then changing the colour of their fill and strokes in the colour panel. Notice how the other symbols have updated both on the artboard and in the symbols panel. In addition to dragging a symbol from the symbols panel to create another instance of a symbol, you can duplicate existing symbols on the page or artboard using the command on the Edit menu. You'll see from the Layers panel that the duplicates are created as linked symbols. We can test this by changing a symbol's design, and we'll see it modified in all instances. We can even add elements to the design, provided we work inside the symbol's container, or remove elements from the design. Next, we're going to examine the functionality of the other buttons on the symbols panel. But before we do, I'm going to tidy up the design and the Layers panel as it's getting a bit messy. That's much better. If we select an instance of a symbol, we can permanently disconnect it from all other instances by using the Detach button on the Symbols panel. You can see in the Layers panel that the selection has reverted to a group and has lost the symbol indicators. Also, if we edit any element of the group, the remaining symbols do not change. This differs from when you want to disconnect all instances of a symbol and return them all to standard objects. For this, use the Delete Symbol option we used earlier in the video. So use Detach for selected instances and Delete Symbol for all instances. Now let's look at symbol synchronization. As I mentioned before, we can select a symbol's container and resize it, and it will only affect this instance. However, other changes such as changing colour, blend mode and opacity are reflected across all instances. So I'll undo my latest changes. Currently, we'd rather the changes only affected this instance, but I don't want to detach it entirely from the other symbols. This is where the Sync button on the Symbols panel comes in handy. Unlike the Create and Detach buttons, the Sync button is a toggle. In other words, it can either be in the On position, displaying a dark background, or an Off position. When the button is in the On position, which it has been throughout the tutorial, changes made to one instance of a symbol are replicated across all symbols. When the button is in the Off position, changes made to one instance will not be replicated across all symbols. Note that synchronization is a document-wide feature, so any symbol and any instance you modify will be affected while it is deactivated. So be careful what changes you make when you switch syncing off, and I recommend switching it back on as soon as possible after you've finished editing. Once synchronization is reactivated, changing one instance will update across all instances once more. If it's not immediately obvious which instances of a symbol are fully in sync with a symbol in the Symbols panel, look at the Layers panel. This instance, which I changed while syncing was off, now shows a dashed coloured line to the left of the content item rather than a solid line. This indicates that that content is not fully synced. To learn more about what attributes are unlinked, place your cursor over the symbols container or individual items, and a tooltip will appear which lists the unlinked attributes. I hope I've given you at least a glimpse of the power behind symbols, which when used correctly allow for a far greater efficiency within design projects. They can be used in a variety of ways and in many situations, so try them in your next project and see what difference it makes. As always, thanks for watching.